Thank you, everybody, for such a warm, heartfelt welcome. Who amongst us would not tremble with indignation over the 14-year treatment of Julian Assange, the most vicious hatred, the most unending pursuit, the most scurrilous lies and calumnies delivered against a person who had only brought us truthful information. We characterise the last election, the last federal election, as an Assange election. All of the teals that were elected as candidates stood on an Assange platform to bring Assange home. The Greens stood on an Assange platform and increased their representation in the House of Representatives by 3. The Prime Minister stood on an Assange platform saying, enough's enough. I don't see the purpose of this ongoing pursuit. Many members of the Labor Party equally stood on an Assange platform. Last week in Bali, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese had the wisdom to mention a journalist in Myanmar, an Australian journalist. He has also the wisdom, after speaking to Xi Jinping, to mention an Australian journalist incarcerated in China.
The PM had mentioned the case of Turnell at the ASEAN summit in Phnom Penh in his speech to the conference, and he spoke about the case to leaders, including the Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen. Within a week, Mr Turnell, a former economic advisor to Aung San Suu Kyi, was being released. Last night, the Prime Minister welcomed the news.
I've just spoken to Sean Turnell, who's been released from 650 days of unfair, unjust imprisonment.
No mention of Julian Assange, despite the fact that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and his government and many other members of the sovereign majesty of federal parliament were elected on an Assange platform. It's not good enough, Anthony. We want Julian brought back to Australia. I'll just finish with this thing. There are 250,000 in the cable set that was released, 400,000 in the Iraq war files, 90,000 in the Afghanistan war files, 400,000 in the Iraq war files, a testimony to the illegal destruction and invasion of Iraq. 1 million people killed. According to Gideon Polya, a researcher at University of Melbourne, on excess deaths, 7 million people directly affected, murdered over the period of 20 years since the first invasion. 36 million refugees, people who have had their communities destroyed. That's a Brown University study. There must be above the Middle East a pall of grief thicker than a thundercloud. To undo that, we Australians insist that who brought us the truth of those matters, the absolute truth which you can stand on, knowledge which leads us to understanding and freedom. The person who brought us that, Julian Assange, be brought home and this persecution stopped. One more thing. These leaks, these revelations that are held on WikiLeaks' website can bring justice and can bring peace. One stopped a war. Really important. I'll just quickly run over that event. 2008, a group of American soldiers went into a house just outside Baghdad and murdered the entire family. The mum, the dad, the babies, the boys and girls, the aunties, the uncles, the grandfather, the grandmother. Looking at this heinous crime, they called in an airstrike and obliterated from the earth all trace of that house and the family that lived within.
For more than 2.5 years, the wire service Reuters has been trying to find out what happened to their 2 staff members on this street.
Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shooting. God damn it, Kyle. All right. I hit him by head. Oh, yeah, look at those dead bastards. Nice. 2-6.
From a distance, you hear the voices on the tape watch as the wounded try to crawl to help. But when help arrives...
Come on, let us shoot. You're engaged. 1-8, engaged. Clear. Come on. Clear. Oh yeah, look at that, right through the windshield.
In this video, I think you see the corruption of pilots and the military by war itself, in particular by the modern nature of aerial warfare. So you see these young pilots acting like they're playing video games, only the high scores they are getting are with real human lives.
We call frequency. I just drove over a body. Yeah.
Even from high above, the harsh reality becomes evident as the troops that arrive find 2 children wounded. You see them carry their small bodies and call for help.
Hey, I need to get the brass to drop ramps. I got a wounded girl. We need to take the rest of mile.
The response on the tape...
Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle. That's right.
Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
The United States ambassador to Iraq wrote up that event and sent the cable to the Department of Justice. Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange published the cable. The people of Iraq read it. The parliamentarians of Iraq read it. The institutions of Iraq became aware. And somehow in that wrecked, ruined, destroyed country, those people gathered together the courage to say to the United States, we will not sign the Status of Forces Agreement, which meant that the United States and its allies, shamefully, my country, the United States and its allies had to remove their troops from Iraq. A leak and its publication brought about the end of a war and the beginning of the long process to peace. Thanks, everybody. Free, free, free Assange!
Brought to you by Freedom Media WA, where journalism should never be a government narrative.